The morning started with something no one in our quiet suburban neighborhood ever expected. At exactly 6:03 a.m., I was sitting in my kitchen sipping coffee from my favorite mug when I heard the unmistakable sound of tactical boots on concrete. Through my front window, I watched as a full SWAT team surrounded my house, their rifles trained on my freshly planted petunias. A megaphone crackled to life with an authoritative voice booming through the dawn air. "This is the police. Exit your residence immediately with your hands visible. We have reports of a fortified compound with potential weapons." I nearly choked on my coffee. A fortified compound? I looked around my modest 3-bedroom ranch-style home with its beige siding and wondered if they had the wrong address. But no, they were definitely surrounding my property, treating my vegetable garden like it was some kind of military installation. The absurdity of it all would have been funny if there weren't actual weapons pointed at my home. What had brought a SWAT team to my door at dawn? The answer was even more ridiculous than the sight itself. Our HOA president, Karen Peaton, had told the police that I was building an underground bunker and that they should, and I quote from the 911 recording I later obtained, shoot if they resist. Let me back up and explain how a retired accountant like myself ended up in this insane situation. My name is David Morrison, and I moved to Maple Ridge Estates 3 years ago, looking for a peaceful place to enjoy my retirement. The neighborhood seemed perfect with its tree-lined streets and well-maintained homes. What I didn't realize was that I was moving into the personal kingdom of Karen Peaton, a woman who treated the HOA presidency like she was running a small dictatorship. Karen was the type of person who measured grass height with a ruler every Tuesday and sent violation notices if your lawn exceeded 3.5 in. She wore designer workout clothes despite never exercising and carried a clipboard everywhere she went, constantly taking notes about supposed infractions. Her husband rarely spoke, probably because Karen did enough talking for both of them. She had this uncanny ability to turn any minor issue into a neighborhood crisis. One time she called an emergency HOA meeting because someone's garbage can was visible from the street for 30 minutes after pickup. My troubles with Karen started small. First, it was a $25 fine for having my recycling bin out past noon on collection day, even though the truck hadn't come yet. Then she complained about the bird feeder I installed, claiming it attracted undesirable wildlife. When I pointed out that birds were hardly undesirable, she changed tactics and said the seed shells were creating a slip hazard on the sidewalk 15 ft away. The fines kept coming for increasingly ridiculous reasons. My mailbox was apparently 2 degrees off perpendicular. My driveway had a suspicious oil stain that turned out to be a wet leaf. My fence was the wrong shade of white, even though it had been that color when I bought the house. Things escalated when I decided to start a vegetable garden in my backyard. Karen insisted I needed HOA approval for any landscaping changes. I submitted the required forms, waited the mandatory 30 days, and received approval from the architectural committee, but Karen wasn't satisfied. She started showing up at my property line with her measuring tape, claiming my tomato plants were exceeding the maximum allowable height for vegetation. She took photos over my fence and sent daily emails to the entire neighborhood about my agricultural violations. The situation became truly bizarre when I decided to install a simple irrigation system for my garden. I rented a small trencher and dug a narrow channel about 18 in deep to lay PVC pipes for the sprinkler system. It was a one-day project that any homeowner might undertake, but Karen, watching from her second-story window with binoculars, she claimed, were for bird watching, became convinced I was up to something sinister. She started telling neighbors I was digging defensive positions and preparing for some kind of standoff with the government. I tried to explain to her that I was simply installing sprinklers, even showing her the receipts from the hardware store and the irrigation system plans. But Karen had already made up her mind. She filed a complaint with the city claiming I was excavating without permits. When the city inspector came out and confirmed I didn't need permits for minor irrigation work, she escalated to the county. When they also found no violations, she went to the state environmental agency, claiming I was disturbing protected wetlands in my bone-dry backyard. Each time an official came to investigate and found nothing wrong, Karen became more agitated. She started recruiting other HOA board members to her cause. She convinced Harold Garrison, the treasurer, that my digging might damage underground utility lines. She told Susan Fletcher, the secretary, that I was probably burying hazardous materials. She even suggested to Tom Bradley, the vice president, that I might be building a bunker to avoid paying property taxes, which made absolutely no sense. But Tom nodded along anyway. The campaign against me intensified. Karen began sending me violation notices daily, sometimes multiple times per day. She claimed my garden violated the neighborhood aesthetic guidelines, even though there were no guidelines about vegetable gardens in the CC and RS. She said my compost bin was attracting rodents, despite it being a sealed tumbler design specifically made to prevent pest problems. She accused me of running an illegal farming operation when I gave some extra tomatoes to my next-door neighbor. Then came the night that changed everything. I had been working late in my home office when I heard rustling in my backyard. I looked out the window and saw a figure with a flashlight moving through my garden. I flipped on the backyard lights, and there was Karen in my yard at 11:30 p.m. with a clipboard and a camera photographing my irrigation trenches. I opened the back door and asked her what she was doing on my property. She claimed she was conducting an emergency HOA inspection, and that she had the authority to enter any property at any time if she suspected violations. I told her to leave immediately or I would call the police. She said with a smug expression that she would be calling them first and stormed off my property. I didn't think much of it at the time, assuming it was just another empty threat, but Karen had something else in mind. The next day, she filed a report with the sheriff's department claiming I had threatened her during a lawful inspection and that I was acting aggressively. She told them about the trenches in my yard and spun an elaborate tale about how I was building fortifications and possibly stockpiling weapons. The deputy who came to check on the complaint was professional but clearly skeptical. He looked at my irrigation system, which was now fully installed and operational, and shook his head. He told me that Karen had made some pretty wild claims, but that he could see there was nothing inappropriate happening. He suggested I might want to consider getting security cameras given the trespassing incident. That turned out to be the best advice I ever received. I installed a comprehensive security system with motion-activated cameras covering every angle of my property. The system saved everything to the cloud and sent alerts to my phone whenever someone approached. Within a week, I had footage of Karen trespassing on my property 3 more times. Twice during the day when I was at the grocery store, and once at 2 a.m. when she spent 20 minutes examining my garden with a flashlight and taking measurements of my tomato stakes. But Karen wasn't done yet. When her direct approaches failed, she began spreading rumors throughout the neighborhood. She told people I was a sovereign citizen preparing for a confrontation with the government. She claimed I had threatened her multiple times, even though I had barely spoken to her except to ask her to leave my property. She suggested that my irrigation trenches were actually defensive positions and that I might be dangerous. Most neighbors dismissed her claims as typical Karen dramatics, but a few started avoiding me. The final straw came when Karen decided to take matters into her own hands, in the most extreme way possible. She called 911 and reported that I had built an armed compound in my backyard and was possibly holding weapons. She told the dispatcher that I was anti-government, had made threats, and then she said the words that would ultimately be her downfall. She said, "If they resist, shoot." She actually told the police to shoot me if I resisted their commands. The 911 dispatcher, thankfully, was a professional who asked clarifying questions. But Karen insisted it was an emergency situation and demanded immediate response. She claimed she had seen me moving suspicious containers into my backyard shed, which were actually bags of mulch, and that I had been acting increasingly erratic. She said the entire neighborhood was in danger and that swift action was needed. The dispatcher, following protocol for a potential weapons situation, dispatched a significant response, which brings us back to that morning with the SWAT team surrounding my house. I walked out my front door slowly, hands visible, wearing my bathrobe and slippers. The lead officer approached cautiously and asked if I was David Morrison. I confirmed I was and asked what this was about. He explained they had received reports of a fortified compound and potential weapons. I actually laughed, which probably wasn't the smartest response. But the absurdity was overwhelming. I invited them to search my property, showing them my irrigation system, my vegetable garden, and my small shed that contained nothing more dangerous than a rake and some organic fertilizer. The officers quickly realized they had been given false information. The sergeant in charge was not happy about wasting resources on what was clearly a false report. He asked me if I knew who might have called this in, and I told him about my ongoing issues with Karen Piton. As it turned out, I wasn't the only one who had been recording things. The 911 call was recorded, as all emergency calls are. When the sergeant reviewed the call, he heard Karen specifically saying, "Shoot if they resist," about a citizen who had committed no crime. Making a false police report is a crime, but telling police to shoot someone raises it to another level entirely. The sergeant informed me that they would be investigating the false report and that I should consider pressing charges. I did more than consider it. I hired an attorney and filed charges for harassment, trespassing, and making false police reports. I also filed a civil lawsuit for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. My security camera footage became crucial evidence, showing Karen repeatedly trespassing on my property and documenting her pattern of harassment. The 911 recording was particularly damaging as it showed she had intentionally tried to create a potentially lethal situation. When news of the SWAT incident spread through the neighborhood, people were shocked. Even those who typically stayed out of HOA drama were appalled that Karen had escalated things to such a dangerous level. Several neighbors came forward with their own stories of Karen's harassment and abuse of power. Tom Bradley revealed that Karen had been using HOA funds to pay for private investigators to watch certain residents she didn't like. Susan Fletcher admitted that Karen had been forging violation notices and backdating them to increase fines. An emergency HOA meeting was called by Tom Bradley, who had finally found his backbone after the SWAT incident. The meeting was held at the community center, and it was standing room only. Everyone wanted to hear what Karen had to say for herself. She showed up 45 minutes late, strutting in like she owned the place, seemingly oblivious to the anger in the room. She actually tried to call the meeting to order as if she was still in charge. Tom Bradley stood up and informed her that she was no longer running the meeting. He presented a motion to remove Karen as HOA president due to gross misconduct, abuse of power, and actions that endangered a resident's life. Karen tried to object, claiming she was protecting the neighborhood from a dangerous individual. But then I stood up and played the 911 recording on my phone, connected to a portable speaker I had brought for this exact moment. The room went silent as they heard Karen's voice, telling the dispatcher to have the police shoot if they resist. The gasps were audible. One woman actually said, "Oh my God," out loud. Karen's face went from red to white as she realized everyone was hearing exactly what she had done. She tried to claim the recording was edited or taken out of context, but the damage was done. The vote to remove her was called, and it was unanimous, except for Karen herself, who voted against her own removal. But the consequences didn't stop there. The district attorney's office decided to press charges for making a false police report and reckless endangerment. Karen was arrested 2 weeks later at her home, and ironically, she was the one who resisted screaming about her rights and threatening to sue everyone involved. She was ultimately convicted of making a false police report and sentenced to $200, hours of community service, and 3 years of probation. She was also ordered to pay restitution for the cost of the SWAT response, which was over $15,000. The civil lawsuit I filed was settled out of court, but not before Karen had to pay significant legal fees. Her homeowner's insurance refused to cover her intentional acts, so she had to pay everything out of pocket. The financial strain was evident when she put her house on the market 3 months later. The last I heard, she had moved to another state, where presumably no one knew about her HOA president infamy. As for me, I still live in Maple Ridge Estates. The new HOA board led by Tom Bradley officially apologized for everything that happened and reimbursed all the fines Karen had illegally imposed. They also passed new bylaws limiting the power of board members and requiring video recording of all board meetings. My vegetable garden is thriving, and I've even started a neighborhood garden club where we share tips and produce. The SWAT team story became legendary in our neighborhood, told at every block party and barbecue. Someone even made a joke sign for my garden that reads, "Warning, dangerous tomatoes." Ha, approved. I keep it up because sometimes you have to laugh at the absurdity of it all. The day Karen was convicted, she stood in the courtroom as the judge read the sentence. Her designer handbag clutched so tightly her knuckles were white. When the judge announced the $15,000 restitution, she let out a sound that was part gasp, part shriek, and her attorney had to steady her as her knees buckled.